Nunc et Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. So yesterday we heard of the feast of the Miraculous Medal, which was given to St. Catherine Labouré. And now we'll hear today about St. Catherine Labouré herself. She was born in 1806 to a middle-class working family, and her mother died when she was only 9 years old. And as I think many of the saints have done, she took Our Lady as her mother after that. It said that after the burial of her mother, she took a statue and kissed it, saying, "Now, dear Lady, you shall be my mother." And at only 12 years old, Catherine Labouré became her father's primary helper in looking after the household. She had a full day of work, which began at 4 a.m. She would walk several miles to the nearby church for Mass, and then stay sometime there in prayer, and then return home and do a full day of work at 12 years old. It says one night she had a dream in which she saw an old priest saying Mass. And after the priest had finished Mass, he turned around and beckoned to her, but she was frightened and drew backwards. The vision changed, and they were in a sick room together, and the priest said to her, "My child, it is good to look after the sick. You might shrink from me now, but one day you will be glad to come to me. God has designs for you. Do not forget it." And then she awoke from that strange dream and didn't know what it meant. But a little while afterwards, she was visiting a hospital of the Daughters of Charity, and that was the order of nuns founded by St. Vincent de Paul. And she saw there on the walls of the hospital she was visiting a picture of a priest. And she recognized it as the priest in her dream. So she asked one of the nuns who that was, and they said, "It's our Holy Father, St. Vincent de Paul." And so that's when she began thinking about, okay, maybe that dream, there was more to that dream than I thought. So she began thinking of a vocation to the Daughters of Charity. And so she continued working for her father, and she also worked for her uncle, who owned a kind of a soup kitchen for poor workers. And she was very much affected by seeing the suffering of those poor workers there in Paris. And so her desire to enter religious life increased until finally, at the age of 24, Catherine Labouré entered as a novice with the Daughters of Charity. Interestingly enough, so she entered in the year 1830 as a postulant and then as a novice. And it was that very same year that she started to have the visions that would become the Miraculous Medal, the visions of the Miraculous Medal. So the same month that she entered, April of 1830, the relics of St. Vincent de Paul were on display in a church in Paris. And the nuns where she had joined went there for 3 consecutive nights. And every night she had a vision of the heart of St. Vincent de Paul above his relics. And she told the chaplain of the nuns about this vision, but he told her to forget about it, not to pay any attention. But a few months later, on the eve of the feast of St. Vincent de Paul, July 19th, the novices received a talk on the life of their holy founder, and each of them was given a little piece of cloth from his surplice, a third-class relic. And so Catherine Labouré earnestly prayed to the founder, St. Vincent de Paul, that she might see the Mother of God with her own eyes. A rather bold prayer. And she went to bed that very night convinced that she would see the Blessed Mother. I don't know how many young, foolish postulants have probably made a similar prayer. But a few hours later, that very same night, she was awakened by a brilliant light and the voice of what seemed to be a little child saying, "Sister Labouré, come to the chapel, the Blessed Virgin awaits you." So apparently her prayer was being answered. So St. Catherine replied, "No, I'll get caught." So she was not supposed to be up at that time of night. But she heard the voice, "Do not be afraid, it is 11:30, everyone is sleeping, so come to the chapel, she's waiting for you." So St. Catherine got up quickly and dressed in her habit and went to the chapel. And the doors were locked, but they swung open as she approached, and she found the chapel ablaze with lights as if it was prepared for midnight mass. She went up to the communion rail and knelt down, and then it says she heard the rustle of a silk dress, and there was the Blessed Virgin Mary, shining with glory, sitting in the chair where normally I think the priest would give addresses. Catherine understood that Our Lady wanted to speak to her, so she rose and knelt down beside her and put her hands in the lap of the Blessed Virgin. And Our Lady said to her, "God wishes to charge you with a mission. You shall be contradicted, but do not fear. You will have the grace to do what is necessary. Tell your spiritual director all that passes within you. Times are evil in France and in the world." Our Lady said, "Come to the foot of the altar. Graces will be shed on all, great and little, especially upon those who ask for them. You will have the protection of God and St. Vincent. I always will have my eyes upon you. There will be much persecution. The cross will be treated with contempt. It will be hurled to the ground, and blood will flow." And so on. So the entire vision lasted about 2 hours, after which Catherine returned to her cell, and she didn't get caught. So the next vision, so St. Catherine would think about this. She had this vision, and that was it. There was she was told she'd be given a mission, but not what it was. And that the next vision would come a few months later at the beginning of Advent. And this time, it was the same year. This is all happening in 1830, that first year she's entered the convent. And this time, she was in chapel with the other sisters for evening meditation, and that's when she had her next vision. And she saw Our Lady over the altar in the manner of the image now on the Miraculous Medal, standing on a globe and her arms, her hands outstretched with graces. Our Lady said to her, "Have a medal struck after this model. All who wear it will receive great graces, especially those who wear it with confidence." And so St. Catherine went to her confessor, who did not believe her at first, but after 2 years, he was convinced. He watched her every day, and for 2 years was convinced of the holiness of her life. And so her confessor went to the archbishop and kind of explained to him what had happened. And the archbishop approved the medals to be made and distributed. And the devotion spread so quickly that it seemed a miracle in itself. Rapidly throughout France and all over Europe, people began to wear the Miraculous Medal, and they began to experience miraculous conversions and healings and so on, protections from danger, as I mentioned yesterday. But for the next 46 years, St. Catherine never received another vision, and she spent the rest of her days caring for the sick and infirm in Paris. And as I also mentioned yesterday, she never gave a conference, she never gave a talk, she was never asked to do anything because nobody knew that she was the one who had received the vision. Her confessor had simply told the archbishop, maybe he told her who it was, but her confessor never revealed that it was St. Catherine. Not even the other nuns in her community knew that it was St. Catherine Labouré who had received those visions. And so for 46 years, Catherine Labouré is, you can imagine hearing about all these things and the popularity of this medal, and nobody knows it's her. But finally, in 1876, she understood that she would die within the year, and she received the grace to know that she could reveal the secret to her Mother Superior. And so she did. She told her Mother Superior she was the one, and that was at the very end of her life. She died as she knew. She knew she would die within that year, and she died on December 31st, 1876, the very last day of that year. Her body was exhumed in 1933, 57 years later, and it was found incorrupt, still fresh, and her limbs are movable, just as on the day of her burial. And so she was canonized, I think, a few years later in the 1940s. And her body is still there in the convent where she lived, on the Rue du Bac in Paris. You can see it underneath the altar. It's in a glass case. There she is. I went there a few years ago while I was on the Chartres pilgrimage. As I mentioned to you yesterday, that the sanctity of Catherine Labouré was not that she received the vision, it was because of her holiness of life, of just doing everyday things very simply and unknown. Even before she was a nun, she was helping her father. She was a pious young girl, getting up at 4 a.m., going to Mass, coming back home, working for the family, having a care for the poor and the sick. And those are virtues that everybody can imitate. And you can see how very little she did. What did she do to become, to become famous, I guess you could say? What did she do so that we're talking about her now? She responded to graces. She, like all the other novices, got those little relics of St. Vincent de Paul. She prayed for a great grace. She received it. She told her confessor what had happened. She said, "This is what I saw. Here's what's going on." And her confessor did the rest. And now we have the Miraculous Medal. So there's very little effort, you would say, that she put into the Miraculous Medal or that whole thing. Very little effort. It wasn't, and that's the thing, is that God gives graces as He will. It does not take, you would say, God doesn't need us to do miracles in the world. And it's saints like this who show that. She just told her confessor what she had seen, and that was pretty much it. So, but it does require great generosity and great courage. It's not easy for, a little girl to lose her mother, to have to, at 12 years old, take on the responsibilities of a household. But she responded generously, very generously to that. And that's what God needs. He needs generous hearts to give Him their time and their cooperation. And when we do that, who knows, that builds and builds over the years, and who knows what God can do. So I would say that would be our great lesson from Catherine Labouré is generosity, a willingness to suffer, to do what God asks, and a love for others, and to give ourselves to the poor and the sick, whether poor and sick in body or in soul. Those who have spiritual poverty, they don't know the truth, and they're tremendously sick steeped in mortal sin. Those are the ones we can be praying for and serving. So let's ask for those great graces through the intercession of Catherine Labouré. May God bless you all. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen.